All right, so welcome everybody. So this is going to be the winter special, and this is our new 2024 season of the webinars. And I think that we addressed those winter issues from time to time and done this individually to many parents. But somehow we didn't really get it into the sort of organized way in some format where you can refer to it later and get it studied and so on. So that's really the idea of today. So that's going to be the winter special. Yes, yes. All right. So winter season special. Finally, with some preparation, we got there. Now, what happens is that, of course, winter is winter, and we are fortunately out of this lockdown situations and the entire craze with COVID, but that means that we are back to the regular world. And in fact, there are two things there. So on the one hand, it's a return of the usual spectrum of the conditions. So the normal colds, the flus, and the flus that come in different versions, right? So especially for those who are in the any sort of social environment where the kids go to school. So that's always the breeding ground for those. But on the other hand, even if you don't go to school and you are on the homeschooling, then it's actually the other challenge. So you don't get the exposure for a while and then suddenly you get the exposure out of somewhere. So overall, that's an issue. Now, what I want to say two things. So to get the whole thing running. So first of all, we are here with this central question. That's going to be the central question from which we are going to develop everything else. So in a super simplistic way, to do or not to do, right? So because this is really the question that typically, or the scenario that comes over and over and over again with the families who are doing ABR. So the usual story from many families is like, oh, we haven't been doing ABR for this X number of weeks because the child felt poorly, he was having a running nose, he was having a cough, he was having a cold, he was having a stomach flu, and generally was more irritable and blah, 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 all these things. So where does this thing come from? So this comes from the standard long-term perspective that when the child is ill, you stop your rehabilitation activities. That's kind of the rule, which obviously connects to their normal life understanding. You project this seasonal illness on yourself and you say, oh, when I have a seasonal illness, I have a headache, I feel sleepy, I don't feel active, I don't feel like doing anything in terms of the exercises of any fitness kind, which is perfectly understandable. So, but then this line of reasoning, when you're ill, you're not supposed to do the rehabilitation exercises, then converts into the next step. So when the child is ill, we are not going to do their rehabilitation therapy, including ABR. And that's the thing that we really want to address. Because the central question that we have to deconstruct is this: what kind of exercise is taking place? And the central message there is to say no to the effortful exercise. So because any effortful exercise, any external physical locomotor activity, or even the school and studies, those are energy drains which are competing with the internal healing resources. So that's really the very simple and key idea to keep in mind. So a child has a limited energy pool to deal with everything, right? So you see, in that sense, we always can put it in this type of equation. So if we put this general daily energy supply, so it will be having several allocations. So the allocation one, that will be the internal needs of the basic running the basic somatic and internal processes. So then on top of this, you will need the extras, which are going to be spent on the tissue repairs that are proportional to the micro damages that came from the activity. Plus, then you have a certain energy waste, which is just dealing with the waste products removal. And then, only after then, you have a certain surplus which could be spent on the external functional activity, which includes anything that relates to a person. In other words, emotional, mental, and intellectual, and then let's put it here, the locomotor. So that's the key thing to understand. Your child has a limited daily energy supply, right? And again, when we talk about the energy supply, the reality of this is much bigger than just the food intake. Because you see, this is another thing that we've kind of got over the recent years, really ingrained in people's mind. This is things related to caloric intake and everything measured in kilocalories, that you need 2,000 calories for this, in terms of the food, and you spend that, and then it's the athletes who spend whatever 6,000, and they can afford themselves to eat the hamburgers. So all these kind of simple equations. But the reality is this. We have to remember that anything that goes into this exchange, regular exchange, is about 1% of what really happens in the body. My favorite example, which is the easiest for you to all to understand and refer to, is, well, actually, like very physiological. So you're drinking about 2 liters per day. And those 2 liters per day, that's approximately the same what you are actually urinating, bringing to the toilet. So this is the basic equation. But if we ask ourselves, like, what is the real workload that your kidneys are processing? And the answer is that your kidneys are processing 200 liters. So that's 100 times more, which means that internal exchanges, they're 100 times at least, and that's a conservative estimate, right? 100 times greater than what you're doing externally. So therefore, when you're looking at all of those kilocalories type of things, you have to understand that this is the same type of the relationship, that in reality, internal bodily processes are 100 times greater than what we see as the external exchange. So that's really something for you to understand very, very clearly, that you are bound by this equation. And once we look at this equation, everything becomes very simple. Because, of course, if you are in this scenario where the child got an illness, right? So the child got an illness. So therefore, what happens? The internal costs and the internal repairs and the internal energy and the waste removal, those numbers, they go up, because this is everything that happens internally. In other words, endo aspects, intrinsic, right? So, and this fun part, the external activity which is related to the person, so because that is very much the, here, this is the endo, this is the soma, this is internal, this is your internal self. So this is something which we don't really conceptualize, which we don't really have the access to. That's your internal big life, right? But as a person, you are here. You are in the emotional activity, you are in the mental activity, you are in the locomotor activity. So once you understand this, it's very clear. For the fixed energy pool, and it doesn't matter the total amount of it, right? So we know that overall, you need, when there is an illness, the demands for the internal energy allocation increases. So naturally, the allocation of energy for the person-related things have to go down. So therefore, as a rule of thumb, for the sort of as normal understanding, you say, oh, I obviously shouldn't do any exercises or any excessive physical activity when I'm ill. And that is, of course, comes together with the idea saying no to the effortful exercise. So once you got this equation, you realize, okay, this is what we have. So that's why, indeed, doing anything related to this external activity should not be part of the recovery. But that, of course, brings us to the next question. And the next question is, okay, what can we do about this internal part, about the somatic part? Are we able to improve the situation and actually help the child in that respect? So that's where we come up with this central point, that you should say no to the effortful locomotor and other type of activities, but definitely you should say yes to the somatic exercise, where the somatic exercise has the goal, if we again get back to this general rule. So here we put the internal ones, and here is the external. So the external, that goes into the reduction mode. That goes into reduction mode. And here we understood there was the energy for the internal organs needs. This is the energy for the repairs of damage, right? And this is the energy which is for the waste products. So, respectively, what does the somatic logic tell us? Somatic logic tells us, as a very big picture, that in order to help the child during the process of illness, we should facilitate and do something that is going to reduce the costs in all of these domains. So whether it's the effort done by the internal organs, whether it's the repairs that they need to undergo through and on and after the illness, or whether it's the waste removal that they need to deal with throughout their illness. And for this, we really get into a very simple equation. Again, so we have this triple connectivity. So energy, it's a, technically speaking, it's a thermodynamic aspect. Then, of course, we have the neural aspect, which would be about the everything sort of electric in that sense, right? The bioelectric signals. And the key domain that interests us is the biomechanical one. So this is costly, right? So you see, the more attention the brain needs to put into a certain area, whatever the brain does at a high cost. We remember that the brain does things at 10 times the cost. It's a very expensive organ compared to the rest of the body. So the thermodynamic aspect, this is a local regulation. And what can we do? We can actually externally facilitate the things biomechanically with our external mechanical efforts in such a way that we will help and facilitate these three kinds of processes. So, but of course, it goes without saying that anything related to this external part, so which is excessive emotional, mental, and particularly locomotor activities, this is what has to be really brought down. And this is what we very much discussed in our previous webinar, where our previous webinar was about the easification, the fundamental distinction. What are we looking at? Are we looking for the easification of the child's life right now as the pathway for the long-term improvement? Or we are doing it via the hardification, right? Hardification, difficultization, and so on. So the day before yesterday, we had the webinar replay in Spanish, right? And we found that in Spanish, this is very difficult to translate the made-up word easification or the made-up word hardification or difficultization. So because easification in Spanish sounds like facilitation, which is pretty much the same as it was, right? So fortunately, in English, we're able to convey these nuances, sort of where we can take the easy versus hard and say, okay, so this is a process of easification versus the process of the hardification. And the scenario when the child is ill just puts an extra lens, an extra focus on this fundamental principle that we always should ask, like, are we able to provide deliberate and focused and intelligent and strategic easification for the child? And once you understand this, then I want you to look at it this way, like, okay, if the child is ill and struggling, okay, it's a good thing that you drop the effortful activities. But then it's very much the situation like the child is drowning and you are just pacing back and forth, being on shore, waving your hands and saying, hey, 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 you know, come on here, you know, get out of this drowning phase. I'm going to help, you know, let's say I'm going to give you a big hug once you come on the shore. So the logic is you shouldn't be on shore. You should go there and try to do your best to help your child to swim to the shore instead of just sending the cheerful messages. So that is really the big thing about saying yes to somatic exercise and seeing the issue of the winter illnesses as this more specific and more I wouldn't know call it that the advanced way, right? So where you're just looking at it not as this is a certain diagnostic label. This is a cold, we just have to wait it out, right? And then take some pills for it, or just get into the bed rest. No, you always go back to this fundamental equation and say, okay, in this scenario, what can I do in order to influence these parts? And these parts are always there, whether you are in a top shape, whether you are in a mediocre shape, or whether you're in a bad shape, because this is really everything is defined by this fundamental equation. So with this being said, now let's move on further and understand this basic thing, right? So we want to help with the energy gain, right? Again, probably I should highlight this thing, that energy gain comes in two formats, right? Energy gain comes in two formats. So it's, in first place, it's a reduction of the energy drain. That's the most important thing, so that the less the child loses on this internal fight, that reduction of the energy drain is the equivalent of the energy gain, very much so, right? And then, of course, when it comes to the gain itself, this is all sorts of the helps, assistances, and so on that you can provide so the child doesn't have to spend this themselves. So that's this basic idea. And then now we're going to move into the next level, which would be more specific. So the big claim there is the general process of the easification. So, and the logic there, biomechanical assistance to biochemical immunity. So, and then we also can have another obvious thing, which would be the improved drainage and the peripheral support relief. So let's give those things a little bit more specific understanding. Let's start with a very simple example, which I've been bringing, I don't know, for 20 odd years. So in order to understand the relationship between the biomechanical and the biochemical aspect, historically, I found it the easiest to think about something that you can refer and really relate yourself. And let's take this example. So you take potatoes, right? I know, hopefully everybody can eat a potato. So, and you take a potato, and then this potato, you just, I don't know, cut in 3 big chunks just at the limit that you can swallow. So it's still possible to swallow, but then this potato drops into your stomach in those large chunks. So what happens? Now, once the potato dropped into your stomach with those large chunks, well, your stomach processes the digestion. But in order to digest the potato, it has to deal with the relationship between the surface and the volume, right? So you see, for a chunk that you have swallowed, why you're supposed to chew, right? Why you're supposed to, why is it better? For a simple reason, because there is for every chunk that you swallow, there is a surface and there is a volume. So once you have swallowed the whole chunk of potatoes, right, without swallowing, that means you have done biomechanically the worst scenario. So you didn't do any biomechanical assistance. You have left the digestion entirely to the biochemical processes. So now the stomach has to generate the enzymes which are going to meet that potato chunk, and they're going to meet this potato chunk at its perimeter. And then once they've digested this surface, the inside part of the potato is not yet digested, right? So then they have to go further, they have to go further, they have to go further. So eventually they will do it, but what's going to happen when you have this minimal biomechanical assistance? That means that your biochemical expense is at its maximum. So you will need a lot more of the enzymes to be produced, and also the time that it will take to digest those chunks of potato will be significantly longer. So therefore, this coordination of processes of how one thing is going to be, which is digested in the stomach, has to pass further into the small and then the large intestine. So this entire process is going to be messed up. So this is a very simple equation. So if you have swallowed and gulped the food, typically you can first you swallow more, right? You eat more, and you actually takes you much longer to digest with much greater effort. So what would be a good scenario? A good scenario of the same potato thing is going to be the opposite. So where you have done the maximum biomechanical assistance, so that original potato got chewn into the smallest possible pieces. So when it enters the stomach, not only, so there are two things. First, it comes with the much better relationship of the surface to volume. So because everything is in the open surfaces, so the enzymes can actually connect to it. And the second thing is, of course, it also gets pre-digested by the saliva and so on. So there's a lot less of those enzymes necessary. So this is a very simple example, but it shows you those two things. So you see how you can relate if you use the maximum biomechanical assistance, then you will need the minimal biochemical contribution. So I've used the example of the biomechanical assistance as this very much the logic of the easification. So good chewing, or in that sense, if the child doesn't chew, that means that you want to get the food in the pureed form. You want to keep it in the mouth for as long as possible. You want to give them the time to swallow. You don't want to rush them through the process and so on and so on. So this is, there's a whole logic that follows once you understand these principles. So because you see so many times we have this scenario, so then when the child, where the parent is rushing the feeding process, sort of getting the large spoon, large big heaps of spoonfuls into the child's mouth, like quick, because we have to go for some important speech therapy. Or, I don't know, other therapy. This is ridiculous, because you are then, instead of utilizing the process which actually has the greatest contribution to the child's development through his particular and personal engagement and so on and so on, so you are actually creating the scenario where you get the minimal biomechanical assistance, increase the biochemical cost, and then get the child into the high effortful expense. So this is how the wrong things are accumulating if you don't think in terms of the equations, right? Because you see, usually people try to ask the questions in a very disconnected way, and then they ask them just like this: is this good or is this bad? Is this good for me? Is it a good therapy? Is it a good thing? But it's not about good and bad. It's about your equations and your priorities, your strategic things, and so on. So what is exactly needed, and what, the good and the bad is in the context of what kind of resources you have and how you prioritize their use and spend. So that's really the key thing to understand. So once we understand this first example, then of course it's would be quite easy for you to understand the other two from this package. So when we discuss, for example, the respiratory illness, right? So when there is a respiratory illness, what do we want to do? We want to get maximum biomechanical assistance to reduce the biochemical effort. So in other words, in order to get the best possible lung clearance, the child needs to be helped to get rid of the mucus as soon as possible, right? And at the least effortful, least costly way. So putting it, the simplest thing that you all know, right? If you start patting your child on the back or tapping your child on the back and so on, just helping them to cough, that's already sort of a contribution there. But if you don't, that means that the viscous substances, which are being the byproduct of fighting the infection, fighting the bacteria, fighting the virus, and so on, those viscous waste products, then the body will need to deal with them. If you can't deal with them in the biomechanical way, so then the body will need to deal with them in the biochemical way. It will need to send some special agents to dilute them, to make them kind of less sticky, so in order to eventually get rid of them. But again, like in our potato example, it will take more time, it will take more effort, it will be the greater cost. So that's really a very simple thing. So we want the body to concentrate and to be free to do the mystery part, right? So the mystery part is the biochemical immunity. All of those, the immunity cells, which again, you've heard a lot over the previous years, right? So you see all of those T cells and the killer cells and whatever other ones, right? And then the macrophages and so on. So you see who deal with the after effects and so on. But the logic is this. This is this immunity mystery, the special cells which recognize the harmful agents, which attack them, protect the body, and so on and so on. This is something very, very, very special. So the same way as in my example, the enzymes which are capable of digesting the potato, this is something very, very special. This is something very mysterious, something which cannot be replaced, and something that, like internal somatic gold, if you wish, right? But what we want to understand, okay, we have this somatic gold, this biochemical mystery, but this somatic gold is very expensive. So what we want to do, we want to maximize the simple, universal biomechanical assistance processes so that the body delivers its magic, but we help it with all the surrounding process, whether it's the drainage, whether it's the kind of their mechanical activity, everything, right? So you see, we want to help it as much as possible. And once we understand this, then the third part also becomes very clear, right? So you see, then here I'm talking about the peripheral support relief. So peripheral support relief is this thing, you know, even when you don't feel well, you still have your limbs and the muscles, right? Limbs, torso, muscles, which are the ones that need some mechanical action in order to be comfortable, right? Because if you're just lying in bed for, I don't know, a day, then after a while you are going to feel the need to move. You would need to feel that you need to move just to refresh, discharge, and so on. And then you are actually facing this conflict. Like, if you need to move, that means that you're going to spend some energy. The energy that otherwise would have gone into their needs of your somatic improvement. So where is the best balance there? And this is where, especially nowadays, with the Vibro tools, we have a very good solution. Because, you know, when it comes to this peripheral support, we remember this basic relationship. There is a tendon, 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 and there is a muscle. So, in fact, in a standard situation, what makes you unhappy is the stagnant muscle, the muscle which actually wants to discharge, right? So you see, and then it's the muscle which wants to then spend the energy in order to get itself reset. But fortunately, with the Vibro tools, we have the other entry. We can enter via the tendons and set the basic discharges and the resets through the muscles without the need for too much of the increased activity and so on. So we can keep those ones at the minimal, or especially if the channel is in a more severe condition, we can make sure that the periphery feels good and that the periphery is actually also helping to the total circulation processes, but without paying the big price for the global movement and for the paying the price for the general effort. So this is, again, the logic where we want to make sure that we are stacking our resources towards their maximum benefit of those internal needs, right? So you see where we want the internal organs, the repairs, and the waste removals. So, and again, as I said, there are two lines which I'm bringing to your attention. One line is a general understanding, general reasoning. Okay, that's what happens. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is a big picture of what my child needs, you know? Meaning, you see, if it's important to, instead of the good and the bad, just learn the simple logic. You see, it's a very simple logic because, for example, if we are using the Vibro tools for, I don't know, 20 minutes of some discharge at the back and some discharge at the legs. So just as a comfort management for the child who is currently feeling sick. So that is going to, and you ask me the question like, oh, but how is that related, for example, to making him deal with a particular type of the flu? Like, is it virus specific? Of course it's not. But the thing is that if we can reduce the energy drain for that peripheral support, and if we can improve the energy gain, which comes through the cycles of circulation that comes from the perimeter, that means that we have already increased the total pool of resources which are available for the internal self-healing. And that's what I keep emphasizing. At the end of the day, with the pills or not or without, everything fundamentally is about this mystery of the self-healing, the mystery of the self-healing, which has this kind of immune, based on the immune gold. And that immune gold, these are our immune cells and their ability to recognize those harmful agents and so on and so on. Our job is to make the surrounding scenario, the surrounding situation as good as possible. Because, in other words, it costs the body significant like chunks of energy to generate, to produce that immune gold, to mine it. It's expensive. And then, the waste products and so on and so on. So what we want to help as much as possible with, this is the gold, but typically what happens, this gold comes with a lot of costs around it and with a lot of troubles. We want to help the body to clear everything so it can just have more resources to mint those gold coins, and so it would be pure gold, and actually that pure gold traded for their faster recovery. So that is really the internal economy of the disease, if you wish. So, and once we understood this, now we move further. You see, I started, my first slides were not even specific, right? I wasn't talking about how to deal with the, I don't know, running nose, how to deal with the sore throat, how to deal with the bronchitis, how to deal with potential pneumonia, right? So you see, or the stomach flu, or the running bowels and so on. I didn't get into any of those, right? So, but fundamentally, I want you to see the big picture. And the big picture, again, is very simple. So what is an illness? Illness, yes, it has a certain agent, right? It has those external agents, especially for the seasonal ones, which have to be neutralized. But that's the external perspective. And again, this is a mystery factor because we have this internal immunity gold, those gold coins, which are being traded to defend, against those external agents. But on the big picture, illness is the change in this equation. So if you are used to a certain regular percentage, let's say for the total normal daily energy resources available to your child, so you see, let's say 90% goes into the internal parts and you're not aware of this. So you see, you are only knowing your energy level through, let's say, the 10% of the external person-related things which are coming into your emotional, mental, and locomotor capacities. So how do you know that you are ill? You know that you are ill when the body starts reclaiming and taking away. So now from 90% internal, it asks for 95%. And if it asks for 95%, then those 10% which were available for the external function now goes down to 5%, right? So if it's a sharp decrease, you feel very poor. Ooh, now you basically feel like half of your energy is gone. But in reality, you've always been running on those internal processes. And what people are trying to do, they try to cheat, like, they try to take some stimulators, they try to take some pills in order to get quicker back to the external activities and so on and so on. So they try to do this in order to, or they try to cheat the body and extract more, so to keep this 10% availability there. And this is again the key mistake. You see, this is coming from the age of the, I don't know, like, put it simply, it's coming from the age of working exploitation, if you wish, right? So you see, if we talk about the thing that that you are being part of the production machine or economic machine, so where your well-being and the ability to earn depends on your ability to participate. So there is a new term which one of the Chinese billionaires came up a few years ago, and it's called huminerals. Huminerals. So huminerals, this is basically from the humans and minerals. So humans as the new minerals, right? So you see, but in fact, this is it. So what the system is doing, the system is mining you as a mineral, kind of for you performing things externally. So if you need to go to work, that's a typical workload situation. You are expecting, you expected not to miss school, you expected not to miss work, you expected not to do so, because if you miss it, then you out of the flow, right? So you see, okay, if you miss school for 3 weeks and you try to go back to school, it's increasingly difficult, and the school kind of punishes you for that. It doesn't adjust to you and say, okay, good, like you needed to do the internal recovery, so well done, let's go back. No, it's the external system which actually treats you as a humineral. And the problem is that not only in the industrial society, when a person is made part of whatever the economic machine, but the greatest paradox that this is even, it's the same thing for the children even with severe disability, because you go back, it's the school which wants you to feed, to fit into a certain program. So this is, you really have to understand this big picture and see an illness in this way. So the illness is just a scenario where your internal soma is reclaiming the energy which it was lending you, like the surplus which was giving you as a person for the external activity. So, and it's not the reason to be disappointed as a person and say, oh, you know what, I want to go back, I want to keep myself, I want to keep my person level as engaged as before. No, it's the understanding, okay, so if the soma needs it, we need to help it as much as possible, reduce the expenses which are taken by the person, and not to be the humineral in that sense. But this mentality is so deeply ingrained in us through the school system, through the economic system, through the cultural norms, and so on and so on. So the very idea, like, oh, like I'm already feeling better, so I should go back to school. This is really the idea. And this is what I also wanted to cover here. So you see, we'll get back to this thing of can the illness be the beneficial, but I also, before I do this, I want to highlight this factor, that every illness has a timeline, right? So you see it has and we'll start from the end, right? Because you see, it's when you are in this state of a relative crisis. So when the child is in a state of a relative crisis, okay, so everybody is like understanding, okay, so it's a crisis, it's bad, like we need to do something, everyone pays attention and so on. But there are two other things. So before the crisis, before this escalation, right? So there is a beginning. But what do we usually do in this scenario? And there are some precursors of illness. Typically, we try to push this away and say, oh, okay, hopefully it passes by itself. We don't need to do anything. We will not ruin our everyday plans and activities because it's kind of feeling not so well. But what does it mean? That means that, you see, for example, if we take a situations when you had the 90% plus the 10%, that's the basic equation, right? Soma versus person. So if the illness here at the point of crisis, I don't know, claims, say, 8% back, so it's 98% soma and just 2% available for the person, which is 5 times less than what you normally want. So you see, that's a really bad state. But in the beginning, it could be as little as, say, for example, instead of 10%, instead of claiming 5% or 8%, it's a 2% claim. So in other ways, so you have the transition, which would become 92% plus 8%. So 8 is less than 10. What do we usually do? You know what? It's still not bad enough. Let's not dwell on it. We are better than this. We are going to try to do this and so on. But especially when it comes to the children with disabilities, should be the rule number one. And I mean, I would even say that it has to be the rule for any child, especially now when we have the active tools, right? Because also, you see, before you were in this situation, like, suppose you got into this scenario, so that instead of the 10% availability, the child is not feeling so well, but it's just down to 8%. It's not his top, but before you didn't have the active tools, you only had the passive tool. So what was the passive tool before? Passive tool before was the bed rest. Okay, you're going to skip school. Passive tools. So the child is then clever, and and then takes the regular fluctuations throughout the day and say, oh, if I can skip school, then I can sort of I can simulate, right? I can pretend, I can escape from the regular demands of the whatever society and so on and so on. So this is what was only possible with the passive tools. So therefore you were in the situation like, okay, it has to be like not just mildly uncomfortable, it has to be super uncomfortable. It already has to be something substantial to switch into the passive tools like the bed rest. So that was the old strategy. And again, it's very understandable. So you see, because with the passive tools, the entire experiences teaches us that, it's, what is this? Is this just a fluctuation of general like shape, or is it really, is it just a global energy reduction, or is it specific scenario where the soma needs more and it's taking away from the person? But now you are in a different scenario. A, you have the active tools, and B, you are dealing with the special child, the child with extra weakness, right? So therefore, the logic here is that because you have the extra tools, so the moment you see something is not fresh enough, what you want? You say, okay, that's a good reason for us to boost the somatic activity. That's it. So you see, the Vibra tools, they also give you this opportunity to really change the whole approach to this. So you see, you no longer have to be like, okay, is it serious enough or not serious enough? So shall I really just dismiss it and not ruin our routines and so on? No. Now, the moment you see there is some drop there, you just switch to the somatic activity. Increase the somatic activity. That's it. That's one big thing which goes around. And of course, there's another big thing, which is about this. So we got crisis turnaround, and the turnaround, everyone is happy. So, I mean, I should have probably put here the process of the build up, right? So you see, not just the beginning, but the build up, right? So you see, if I put the turnaround, like slowing down. But then we go into the recovery and the regeneration. And again, this is something that people get completely wrong. You see, the moment the symptoms are gone, everybody is like, okay, we have missed so much time. We have to catch up with school, with this, with this, with this, with this. So basically, this claim, right? So you see, again, if we go back there, so the 90 and 10, so the moment there is a chance to get this 10, you sort of, oh, well, 10 is not enough. I'm going to get even 12%, right? So I'm going to, we have so much to catch up. I'm so fed up of being at home. We need this activity. We need this, right? Wrong. They're wrong, because you see, there is a general rule of thumb. Recovery and the regeneration takes 3-4 times the time that the crisis and turnaround was there. So you see, in other words, if your child was in this sick phase for, let's say, 1 week, that means that for the next 3-4 weeks, you have to keep an additionally high somatic activity to make sure that everything goes well, that you are really getting not just the basic recovery, but the deep, proper tissue renewal and the regeneration. And in that sense, this is why, with this understanding, you can go back to we can go back to my previous slide. And my previous slide was here. Can the illness be beneficial? And the answer Strangely enough, yes. So there is a reason for illnesses. You see, the thing is that, for example, the humans are the only species who, gee, I always forget this term, right? So you see, when the animals change their skin in the spring and on autumn, see, there are certain words which just escape your mind, right? So you see, let's put it like the fur shedding, right? So you see, there is a better term for this, but I'm sure you will understand that. So the animals, they have this fur shedding in the change of seasons, spring and fall. Humans don't. We don't have the fur. We have our nice, bare, naked skin, which is the most effective sweat producer out of all animals. So, but the fact is, when the animals have those seasonal transitions, that helps them. They don't feel particularly well, and even if you look at it, there is at the studies in the animal behavior, there's even like whatever the drop in the hunting activity. I know, like the wolves is not going to chase the sheep or something like this, right? So you see, because they're in this internal transition phase. Because you see, there is always this challenge for, in your body, there are different cycles. There are cells which have a longer cycle, there are cells which have shorter cycles, and even of the same type of the cells, it's the same cell can have a different lifespan, where the cell itself has enough energy to provide for its own needs, so it doesn't die yet, but it's no longer being functionally very productive, so it doesn't help the rest of the organism. And then the body is facing this challenge, like, okay, how do I recognize which cells of mine are the ones which are really not helping the others, which are due for renewal, and which cells are actually the strong functional cells, which are the really like contributors and leaders. And the only way to test this is via the external agents. So you can see the viruses and bacteria as kind of the outsource. So you see, the body outsources the stress test to the external agents. So they are coming and they are actually putting everyone to test and saying, okay, we are going to poke into you, and the ones who are too weak, we're going to eat them alive, That's what they do. So the cells which are weaker, they die through the process. So meaning, by right, the regular seasonal illnesses, they are part of this helping the body, keeping the internal self-healing and the internal kind of freshness, if you wish, right? So you see, like to distinguish the cells which are going to work and which are capable of dealing with the stresses and which are not. So, and set the renewal processes. So there is, in that sense, they're not the like bad guys. They're not the attackers in that sense, right? So you see, they are part of the ecosystem which is dealing with us, right? But of course, like from the natural perspective, from the perspective of the natural evolution, it's a natural selection. The one who has too many cells which are not functional enough gets selected out. So we are in a different scenario. So we have to understand this big picture and say, okay, there is a good reason for those viruses and bacteria to coexist with humans. So, but when they have arrived, right? So you see, and they start doing this kind of stress test for the internal cells, it's important for us to help at all stages. So we help the body at the crisis and turnaround, so that the turnaround is as fast as possible, the crisis is as short as possible, so that we have this biomechanical assistance to it, so to reduce the biochemical gold cost. But the essential thing, which is much less understood, is facilitating the recovery and the regeneration. So because without the full phase of the regeneration, the benefit of the illness is lost. So you see, it kind of cleared the way, but you need to give the body the capacity to rebuild internally, right? It's like, you go back to this proverbial scenario between the traffic and the highways. So and the maintenance. So if you are closing the highway for maintenance, it's very uncomfortable for people who are used to travel there. So you have to take the country roads, which is much slower, blah, blah, blah. But you need this maintenance time. But if you really want to rebuild a good road, you need to follow the technological process. You want to, you don't want just to put like a few asphalt patches, which are going to get destroyed in a few months, right? So you see, you want to rebuild the entire road, the layering and everything else, and only then put the asphalt. So this is the part of this regeneration and recovery process. So that's why when it comes to the illness, it's really important to see everything, to see the beginning and to see and you see the the entry and the exit. So you see, seeing the illnesses not as a nuisance, right? Not as just kind of the enemy, not as the fact that distracts you from the good things in life and from from the development and so on, but you see them as a part of the entire developmental process. So that's really the key big message there. So once we see the big message, then we can move it to the next level. That was the answer. Okay, so now we're seeing the big picture. Now we're seeing the big picture. So that brings us to this relationships, okay? So now we're moving to the more practical side. So we look at the three different elements. The deepest endo, that's the somatic. Then we have the actual torso, right? And I will include the outer layers and so on. And then you have the limbs. See, I've sort of put them in circles without drawing the lines, right? So you see, without drawing them in, okay, this is the head, these are the legs, this is it. I just deliberately put them in those circles. So what we want to understand is that those elements, we want them to be not in competition with each other, especially throughout the illness, but we want them to be in as much as possible in the support and the cooperation. So where, for example, the limbs would service as much as possible the lymphatic and circulatory processes, right? So you see, because the venous outflow and so on particularly depends on the pumps through the limbs, right? So you see, then we would also want to make sure that, for example, the torso, whether it's the abdominal layers or thoracic layers or the back layers, that they are actually being nicely coordinated with the somatic part and not interfering with these more complex needs of the somatic healing. At the same time, so they are facilitating the kind of the discharge for the end processes rather than competing with them. So you see, this is what we really want to install. We want to make sure that we really see the clear differences between the endo, between the torso, and between the limbs, and we really not just saying, oh, is it good to move or not, right? So you see, I mean, let's do some crawling, or let's do some, let's say exercises and so on. You have to see it in this specific sequence. When you are ill, in particular, you want to make sure that you're not creating the competition, because when you're trying to do, I know, standing in the standing frame, whilst the body is trying to handle the internal somatic needs, you need to really know why you're doing it, right? So you see, because if you are figured out, then the standing frame in a somewhat tilted fashion helps with the, lung clearance and, stomach digestion and so on. That's a good judgment. But if you are doing this when your child is ill, because, you have the routine and somebody told you that this is going to help with the hip subluxation, this is stupid. So, because then your goal comes in the competition. So you are only able to do those things which are driven by lesser goals. You can only do them when you are in a better condition, when you are in your, say, normal 90 internal, 10 external state, but not when you are in 95 and 5 state. So this is what has to be understood very, very clearly. And then from the same perspective, then we also have to look at the hydro perspective, right? The hydraulic perspective. Hydraulic perspective is this: you have the somatic, which is a specific mucosa, right? So you see the mucus which is being generated within the lungs, right? So it's the specific enzymes and so on, so which are being produced by the exchange of the lining within the stomach itself. The exchange of the lining and the activity of the cilia in the intestinal system and so on. That's a specific interface which the somatic units have. Then, of course, you've got the circulation, which is the arterial, right, and the venous thing, which is responsible in first place for the gas exchange as the main catalyst of the process. And then you have the lymphatic interstitial, so which is the basic detox and which are the slow cycles of exchange in the body. So this is, again, we have to take this into the proper context. So when the child is ill, that means that we have to really put those guys into the maximum cooperation of particularly, let's say, linking the mucosa and the lymphatic. So seeing, the ways to facilitate the gas exchange and so on. So we really have to see this in a more, again, as the big picture integrated light. And then we will be looking now at the more practical side, which is their mucus production versus the mucus absorption, evacuation versus resorption, catalyst inhibitors, and so on. And this is where I'm encouraging really people to start thinking this way, right? Because unfortunately, in the medical world, right, so you see it's all about, oh, what's the best pill for this, right? So you see, oh, what's the best, like, the new thing? Shall we just, like, whatever? So when do we take paracetamol and how much of the paracetamol, or what are the antibiotics course, or this kind of thing, right? Or if this antibiotic is not helping, when are we going to switch to a more powerful antibiotic, right? So, and then, okay, so at least the more recent trend is to say, okay, at least after the use of the antibiotic, probably you need to, people get aware that you need to spend considerably longer time on using the probiotics to sort of restock their bodily flora and so on. But this principle, if you're using antibiotics, that you have to like spend at least 5 times as much on getting the probiotics to repopulate that flora, right? So you see, this principle is everywhere. This principle is very universal for all the other aspects as well. So, and again, I hope that this is very clear. Now, and then we're going, so our plan now is to move to something more practical. So, you see, an important practical side is this. Like, if you get this from this webinar, this is going to be already very good. Look, one of the key points overall that we have to keep in mind: lungs are the organs of the gas exchange. So this is where the oxygen and carbon dioxide gets exchanged 20,000 breathing cycles per day. Now, what services this process is the production of mucus. And an interesting thing is that at any given time, there is something like 50 to 100 mil of the mucus which is servicing the gliding of the different layers within the lungs and so on. It's 50 to 100 mil. This is like, if you use the American one, from 1.5 to 3 ounces, right? So you see, that's what you have at any given moment in time there. But the total production daily of what the lungs generate, it's about 30 liters. It's a huge number. Even if I take, you see, if I take 3 ounces here, right, or 100 mil, and the 30 liters, so you see 30 liters means that's 30,000 milliliters. So means that the total things get the 300 times a day complete renewal. So once we understood the example with the urine, right? So you see that there's a 200 liters which are being drained through, right? So it's not a surprising number over here as well. So it's about the same number. That's about the ratios, how the body deals with the internal and external relationships. But now you might ask the question, like, ooh, if it's 30 liters, so again, in the American terms, 30 liters would be like, if I get it in pounds, it would be 65 pounds, right? 60 pounds of fluid in terms of weight, and probably it's kind of I always get confused between American and the 7 to 8 gallons of fluid which is being produced there. So he would say, ooh, like 30 liters, where would they go? My child, is 20 kilo in weight, like, and he produces 30 liters per day. Where would all this go? So, and that comes into this primary thing, which is the absorption that goes via the diaphragm. So the diaphragm acts like a sponge, which pretty much helps it to get into the abdominal cavity, and within the abdominal cavity there are strong lymphatic nodes, and those lymphatic nodes, they absorb it and bring it back into the interstitial flow. So that's one of the key equations that we have to keep in mind, that there are two essential points. one essential point is that you have the generators, like the lungs, they are more the generators, and the abdomen, so this is generating. So generators and absorbers. So it's their abdominal part which does the absorption. The same thing when you talk about the stomach, intestines, and so on. So what is the greatest absorbent? That's their peristaltis, and this is their the thin and the small and the large intestines. So it's the abdominal part which is the absorbent. And again, now if you talk about the neck, it's also being the absorbent. So what is, so the mouth and the lungs, they are the, and the thorax, they are the generators. The neck and the stomach, they are the absorbers. And again, if you ask yourself a question, where do you have the bigger lymphatic nodes? You're going to have the big lymphatic nodes in the neck, right? So you see in the neck around the jaw area. So therefore, we have to keep in mind these primary equations. The primary equations being, if you just think about it, like a very simple idea. For 30 liters a day and 100 ml at any given time. So you see, if there is a 30 liters which are being generated there. Now, what if your absorption rate through the diaphragm and into the stomach, what if your absorption rate drops by 1%? That means you have an additional 300 ml of mucus to get out somewhere else. So when it was comfortably going through, but now you have 1.5 cups of sticky mucus, then you have to get out through the other way. That is difficult. Now imagine if it's not 1%, if it's 2%, right? Now it's 3 cups of mucus to get out. That's a really huge effort. And, you know, of course, also don't forget that if you don't get it expectorated quick enough and so on, then you're going to have the problems with, there is going to be an additional bacteria and fungi and so on, which is going to reside there, or it can kind of get glazed as it was the problem with COVID and so on and so on. So you really have to get it out, right? So that brings us to this key point. You see, historically, and this is what I have to admit, you see, in the past, before the Vibro tools, we were more focused on working when the child was ill. We were more focused on working at the thorax, so to facilitate the activity of the lungs, right? Because again, historically, everybody works there. If you sort of do about patting the child on the back, you know, tapping and so on, just to help to clear the lungs that way. But this is good, but this is still not addressing the source, because basically this way you are dealing with the after effects. So you see, if for whatever reason during the illness the harder work of the diaphragm, the extra stiffening and so on affects your absorption process by 1 or 2%, you get so much there. So maybe by working at the thorax, you're facilitating the ability to get rid of it, but it's still a hard work. So therefore, and also the second part was that, okay, so historically when we were working at the abdomen, the only thing we had there was, you know, whether it was the compression techniques or whether it was the Powerball techniques and so on. So those are more demanding on the parents and so on. But the Powerballs, I still emphasize their importance for the especially abdominally for the illness management. But now our new logic, improved logic, right? So you see, follows this. So you see what we want to start dealing with the illnesses via the areas which are their absorption areas. So it's addressing their abdomen and the neck. Also, the very big benefit there is that historically also you discover this specific thing. So when you start working with the lungs, okay, so you are helping, or with the thorax in general, you are helping to clear the mucus out. But by working at the lungs itself, you're bringing the extra activation there, so they actually start to generate more mucus, which is actually a good process because you activated them and they started clearing themselves out quicker. But if it's not timed well with the absorption from the abdomen, then you have the troubles. So you see, then the child produces a lot. So you see, it's clearing the lungs. The lungs are getting clear, but the child is getting stuck. So that's why today our strategy implies that we are focusing right from the start. When you don't know what to do, you start with the absorption mechanisms. And also the same thing when we talk about the torso, we are not going first thing at the projection of the thorax. We are starting to do this in a more peripheral way, right? So you see, we're starting with the perimeter, addressing more the entry which would go through the arms, through the top, and so on. So we are not going to get right there at the first thing. So we save this kind of bit for last. So we want to improve the absorption and the additional help through everywhere before actually going into the lung area. And once you understand this logic, this, the absorption generating logic, this brings us back into this idea of what I was talking about, the timeline of the illness. So because, once you have the easy tools of working with the absorption mechanism, you don't have to question yourself, okay, let's wait until the crisis is going to develop, or will it develop into the crisis, or just something like this. So what you can do, the moment you see even some remote traces, or as an additional kind of prophylactic thing into the winter season, well, you just do more of this abdominal and the neck applications to help you to make sure that your processes of the absorption, that they are working quicker. And also, in that sense, you also want to make sure that you are facilitating the help with the bowel movements and so on and so on. So this is really, if we put it in a very practical sense, so this is what we have. We have the now, and again, the Vibra tools really make it into something very, very easy to do. So we look at it in a very simple perspective. So the moment we have any kind of challenges, we jump in and start immediately working at the levels which are addressing the abdominal part. Now, the good thing is, see, also with the Vibra tools and the new techniques, these big sandwiches and so on, we are really respecting and recognizing the complexity of the abdominal build. Because in order to fine-tune and activate this absorption, right? So you see, when you look at the 12 layers of the abdomen, the most important thing for you is to reach out and get the specific response from the depth, so that you will get the activity which is going to be endocentric, right? So you see, remember, I used this example here about the cooperation rather than competition. So you see specific, okay, this one, endo, the torso, and the limbs. Because you see, if you look at the same abdomen, these 12 layers, they have different roles. So in that respect, the muscles of the external and internal oblique, they are part of the torso. They're not part of the endo. So it's the transversus abdominis, which is kind of in between. So which is belongs to the border between the torso and the endo. And in that sense, this is what you have to keep in mind, right? So you see, whilst in that sense, the skin on the one hand has the connection directly to the endo. On the other hand, with the superficial muscles, it has the connection to the limbs. So when we are in this endo state, we really want to zoom in and we want to maximize this deep parietal entry. Again, currently, we have very easy tools of doing this, and this is the logic there, is to start doing it very systematic. And then the other things that we also have to think about all the time, right, is that you see, you also look at the child, you're saying, you know what, you need to get things going to help them to facilitate the maximum relaxation. So what are the tools of the maximum relaxation from the point of the limbs? That will be the digits. So working more with the feet and the hands to facilitate the relaxation there. So also we have the abdominal access via the pelvic floor. So these are key things that we can do systematically and universally for as a basic tools of the prophylactics. So you see kind of the prevention and also handling it. So when we would be keeping the child, helping as the special sort of winter set, promoting the general relaxation so that we would discharge the limbs, right? And the relaxation of the limbs also means that they are going to have less competition with the torso, less competition there, so less competition with the endo, with the deepest aspects. So in other words, what we want to make sure that we feed when it comes to the limbs, that we switch them to the digits as much as possible, so that the arms and the legs are more digit related. And when it comes to the torso, we are zooming into the endo aspect, so that to make sure that the cascades are working from the endosomatic, then to the discharge to the torso, and then go into the limbs. So this is the basic logic. But of course, as we go on, we can always design for you the specific program, like which would be also the big part which we have nowadays is especially if we talk about the discomforts on the of the where is this? So especially if we talk about the things related to the face. So again, the vibro pens are really, really helpful, in helping everything related to the clearance of the sinuses and everything that is being, all the kind of generators at the face, so that they can actually be facilitated in the discharge. And also the same thing, through this we have the easy ways of working with the neck. Again, the neck is a major absorption mechanism, right? So that's also very much workable. So, I mean, I'm running close to 2 hours. I think that I'm sort of going to exhaust the audience attention like with this. So, with that, I'm going to fold my story for now, and well, contrary to my expectations, I didn't exhaust the subject, but I hope that I laid a good enough foundation, both in terms of reasoning and understanding, and also in terms of realization that current generation of our active somatic tools, let's even write it down, right? Active somatic tools is really changing the entire approach on how we handle all the phases. So the beginning and the kind of questionable beginnings or potential early signs, then the build-up itself, then the crisis, then the turnaround, recovery, and the regeneration. So each of the phases, when you're not sure, just work more, right? And when you ask where to work, you have the things which I've just addressed for you, right? So you see, you want to focus on the absorbers and the relaxators before getting more from the generators, because the body will give you the generation. So it needs bigger help with the absorption and the relaxation. So that's going to be my kind of general message as this webinar. And again, we are welcoming questions, clarifications, and so on, when it comes to the individual cases and the individual tolerances and so on and so on. But I hope that through this webinar, I managed to get the basic layout and cleared a lot of like simplistic approaches. What do we need to take in order to get, what pills and what routines we need to take in order to get through the winter illnesses quicker and get back to the everyday, normal life, right? So you see, it's to understand that illness is part of this molting process. So, and it's our special human way, and it has to be treated as a part of life, not as an obstacle of life, and we have to maximize its benefits and not only seeing it as the negative factor. All right, so I guess we will say goodbye to the people in Facebooks now, right?
Yes, and remind all the Facebook viewers that if they are ABR families, to get in touch with us to join the Q&A that is coming in a few minutes.
All right, so you see, we're going to take a short break to get me some tea, and then, in 10 minutes, we're going to start the Q&A, right?